by definition, there's something they're doing really right. Oftentimes, it's the force of nature that is the owner or the management team, the owners that are that push behind the business. And the problem is to try to transition that, it's almost impossible to replace that. And so we've seen tons and tons of businesses where we come in and we're like, guys, you guys are doing great, awesome business. The problem is it's
Mm.
all pivotal on you.
Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman. Welcome to another episode of How to Buy and Sell a Business Successfully. My name is Sam Foreman. I'm one of the hosts. I'm the founder of Foreman Law. Our firm is focused on working with folks that buy or sell businesses and helping them close their deals with confidence and peace of mind. One of the things we're passionate about is partnering with our clients to help build thriving local communities. And we're grateful to kind of support that through this podcast in particular. One of the best things in my life right now is that my kids love having me tell them stories still. So they still want to spend time with me, which is great. I mean, they're 3 and 7, so that's good. They're also very creative. We've got this sort of ongoing story with a character named Cactus Pants, which is super fun. And we've been world building. I have very creative children, and frequently they will interrupt me when they don't like how the story is going, and they'll start to tell portions of it for themselves, which is kind of nice. I think we've got a couple of entrepreneurs in the making. So
yeah, that's awesome.
And with that, I'll pass it to Jake Wayman.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. My name is Jake Wayman. My wife and I are the proud owners of Orange Theory Fitness here in Wichita. We have 3 studios here, and I'm also a fractional business development executive for my firm, Wayman Consulting, where I work with companies helping them grow their top line revenue. Something that's fun in my life right now is my little girl who turns 2 here in a couple of months. She is starting to say a lot of like full words now. And the other morning, my wife had said like, "Oh man, that's this is a gorgeous morning." And she looks at me and she goes, "Gorgeous," and she's 2, and that's a very big word for a 2-year-old. But just how she said it was like the cutest thing. So
that's awesome.
It's awesome kind of seeing her grow up and everything. And then I have my 4-year-old who's just a terror sometimes, but he's hilarious at all of that. But anyways, I'm excited to introduce Brent Beshore with us. He's the CEO of Permanent Equity and the founder of that organization too. But I got to know Brent through one of our previous guests, Scott Fluke. He's actually the one who introduced us. And so Brent and I have had a couple conversations, connected on LinkedIn. And if you don't follow Brent on LinkedIn, do so. He has got some great content that's out there. But with that, I'll let Brent introduce himself.
Yeah, well, thanks guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Brent Beshore, live in Columbia, Missouri. I've got a wife, 16 years now, and we got 4 kids. So 10, 8, 6, and 1. I think my favorite part is just every one of the kids is in a completely different spot in life, and it's so much fun. My 3 oldest are girls; they're like a little girl gang, and my 1-year-old son is just rocking. He's taking a bunch of steps now, and finally, I think recently, sleeping through the night. So just
that's
been
a
a really great time.
Oh man,
That's awesome.
My 2-year-old does not still sleep through the night, so I can't wait for those days. My 2-year-old's amazing at it. My 4-year-old not so much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. One of the things we talked about on this podcast a number of times is the mindset that a lot of folks in the private equity world bring to the table when they're looking at businesses. They're looking at a relatively short time horizon, maybe a 4-year, 5-year period. And a lot of the folks that listen, may have a commitment to their community. They're thinking about their employees, and see a lot of the behavior that many private equity firms kind of bring to the table. And I think one of the things that's jumped out to me about the organization that you're building is that you view things differently. You've taken a very different approach, and love for you to kind of talk about that a little bit and what makes that different from sort of the stereotypical PE approach to things.
Yeah, I feel like in many ways we're kind of the opposite of traditional private equity. I mean, technically, everybody who buys equity in private businesses is private equity by
Mm-hmm.
definition. But
Hmm.
Right.
traditionally, that model has been what we call the LBO model, the leverage
Mm-hmm.
buyout model, and I call it the buy, lever, strip, and flip model.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So traditional private equity, and by the way, it's been very successful financially. The traditional model is that you buy with the intention of holding the company for really as short a time as you can, at
Mm-hmm.
max maybe 4 or 5 years. You try to use as much debt as you possibly can, use as little equity as you possibly can. You're trying to strip out as much cost structure, replace leadership, kind of all those things that would juice the earnings of the company,
Hmm.
kind of juice the trajectory. Whether or not sustainable is really not your problem because you can sell it to somebody else, and then you really go down that path to sell it. So, if you look at a lot of family-owned businesses that have been run similarly, I wouldn't say the same way, because of course every successful business is going to continue to evolve, but similarly um, you take that and then you do private equity, and really the business will never be the same. So you're forever going to be resold until eventually you're subsumed up into something and the brand goes away. And this is where you get into some tough stories, right? Where the private equity firm, again, it all makes sense on the spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
Clear cuts the leadership team, brings in a new leadership team, sets new growth targets, pushes everyone hard, says, "Hey, we're going to do a tour duty." Like that's kind of in the private equity
Mm-hmm.
world what is known as is tour duty. It'll be 2 to 4 years, and we're gonna go as hard as we possibly can. Sort of got to put your families, your personal life, everything off to the side. You got to give the business 100% of who you are, maybe even more than 100% sustainably of who you are. And then at the end of that, we're all going to sell, and we're all going to make a bunch of money together. And look, some people love it, many people don't. And so I didn't come from a financial background. In fact, I've never taken a financial class in my life. I can barely open up Excel, never worked at another firm. I accidentally bought a business is how I got started. And I was an operator before then. So I was operating my own business that I'd started, bought a business, and that was 15 years ago. And after that, it was okay. Well, would love to do more of that, do more of what works and less of what doesn't.
Hmm.
And as I looked around, I was like, man, I can't imagine being in the position of being an operator where private equity buys my business. I wouldn't be able to handle the stress of the expectations, the stress of the debt. And by the way, when I say expectations, I'm not talking about we have high expectations. Everyone should have
Hmm.
high expectations
Mm-hmm.
of what they're trying to do, but expectations that are if we don't achieve this level of growth within this short period of time, come hell or high water, that puts a different level of stress, and especially the stress to work really, really long hours. Now, we all work long hours occasionally,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, but we want to be there for our families, right? We just talked
Hmm.
about our families. We want to be there
Mm-hmm.
for our families. It's really hard in that environment to do that. So whenever we looked at the world and said, okay, well, what would we want? What's a product that we would want? We would want something that's low debt, maybe even no debt, something that you could be held for a really long period of time that would keep the culture intact, that you work with the leadership teams that are in place and augment with other talents that maybe they're lacking, bring some unusual perspective to the table, best practices across, a different viewpoint, and all win together. And so that's basically what we've done. So Permanent Equity raised two 30-year funds. So we're I think the longest dated private equity funds in the world, and that allows us to buy with no intention of selling the business. The last I don't know how many transactions we've not used any debt, and that's really our intention. So we buy with all equity. And that allows us to have incredible flexibility with the cash
Hmm.
flow. We can reinvest back in the business, reinvest in the things that we know are going to grow the success of the business over the long term. And yeah, bring those new perspectives, new talents to the table and try to all win together.
Yeah. One, and that is like a complete, 180 from how, traditional private equity works. I mean, even I saw a stat this morning about, how private equity is most all the companies that are owned by private equity has shrunk in value, even though the number are still out there because a lot of them had that 5 year time horizon and they weren't able to exit in the 5 years. And they probably are only planning for that 5 years. And now they're in year 6 or 7 and don't know how to operate that business past that. And so now they're kind of having, either like a come to Jesus meeting or something like that to that extent because they don't know how to plan past 5 years when they go into acquiring a business.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. I mean,
Yeah.
and look, there's plenty of success stories too. And I have
Yeah.
friends that work in traditional private equity and do a great job
Yeah.
and truly try to care about people. I just don't think that the structure lends itself to
Hmm.
the best instincts that we have.
Yeah.
It's hard to make good long-term decisions and be kind and generous and long-term in your relationships when
Hmm.
you're operating with short-term
Yeah,
capital.
absolutely. Well, and
Preach.
yeah, no doubt. Well, with a 30-year mindset, and I think I read on the website, you guys have, looked at over 15,000 companies and you have about 16 in your portfolio. So, what are some of the common, mistakes, business owners are making when they're like looking at doing a sell of their business, but also at 15,000 looks at companies. I mean, what are things that stand out to you when you're having those conversations with business owners?
Yeah, I would say that probably the most common mistake, and it's a very human one to make, is we all want to feel necessary. It feels really good to be needed. And business owners are kind of crazy. In order to start a business and
Hmm.
grow a business, you got to be divergent from the general population. So usually big personalities, high work ethic, high intelligence, a lot of street smarts and grit. These are all wonderful things. The problem is they're usually not great at scaling
Mm,
themselves. They're good at scaling the company, not at great at scaling themselves. And so, one of the first questions we always ask is, tell us about the last time you took a vacation. Tell us about the last time that
Mm.
you let somebody else make big decisions. Like, how does decision making even work in the company?
hmm.
And more often than not, most of the successful smaller companies, and we say smaller, maybe we should define smaller, right? So if we're talking with them, they're typically at least at 3 million, if not $5 million in earnings, like
Hmm.
true free cash flow, not
Yeah.
revenue, but profit,
Yeah.
and up from there to kind of like low 20s. And so, these are successful big businesses. There has to be someone or a group of people that are highly talented to compete in a competitive marketplace and to win. By definition, there's something they're doing really right. Oftentimes, it's the force of nature that is the owner or the management team, the owners that are that push behind the business. And the problem is to try to transition that, it's almost impossible to replace that. And so we've seen tons and tons of businesses where we come in and we're like, guys, you guys are doing great, awesome business. The problem is it's
Mm.
all pivotal on you.
Hmm.
You're the solution and you're the problem in this case, right?
Hmm.
So my advice to sellers is you got to be able to look at the business and say, what would it be worth independent of me? So again, you get hit by a bus today. What is it worth to your family in whatever remains? And if you look at that and you say, ugh, that wouldn't be a good situation, then you really need to start working yourself out of a job. And I think this is the pinnacle of all leadership is to be so thoughtful and pick so many people up and help train them up that you functionally make yourself irrelevant to the
Hmm.
business. Now, when you get to that point, the scary thing is, oh, well, no one's going to love me, no one's going to want me around. And the irony is that really you put yourself in the best position you possibly can because you can be always helpful. You have incredible encyclopedic knowledge of the business. You have tons of just wonderful relationships. You can bring a lot of things to bear on the business, but you aren't necessary. So you get to pick and choose where you get involved. You get to, that Venn diagram of what the company needs, what you're great at, and what you love. You can actually like operate in the middle of that thing, which is still pretty rare for most business owners. So I'd say
Hmm.
that's my kind of biggest piece of advice overall, just is that owners think really hard about what they're doing in the business day to day and week to week, and try to be able to take vacations if they want to take them. Now, you don't have to take a vacation, um, but you need to be able to.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome advice. Um, I think a lot of business owners would tell you that, hey, one of my top goals is I want to maximize the value of the business. I really want to, have a great exit. I want to be able to do all these things. But as you've observed, a lot of them put themselves in a position where their value is irreplaceable to the business. And how do you help people try to identify that sort of difference between what they say their goals are and what their actions, their calendar says that their goals are, and how receptive are folks to that in those interactions?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something. I mean, the whole business that we have is predicated on
Hmm.
predicting the actual behavior and
Hmm.
thoughts of the counterparties, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
trying to really understand what their interests are, and so it's asking the same question five different ways
Hmm.
without it being obvious that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're trying to compare what they say and the reality of the situation. So we're trying to get
Hmm.
a lot of information on what does this actually look like, how are they performing, what are they doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just observe them, right? I mean,
Right.
personally, professionally, we're trying to just, it's like putting together a puzzle where you sort of get little pieces and you don't quite know how it all fits together, but you're confident that you're getting a better picture every time you interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of maximizing the value, my advice, I mean, look, we pay a fair price. We want everyone wants to get
Mm-hmm.
paid for the work they've done. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. That's how the world works. I would caution sellers on the topic of only optimizing for price. That by definition, if you're only optimizing for price, you're going to be indiscriminate about who you sell to.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm.
literally just somebody with bigger bag of money
Yeah,
shows
yeah,
up and puts it on your
Right.
doorstep and you're
yeah.
going to sell it to
Yeah.
them. The consequences of that are pretty dramatic, can be dramatic, right? The
Mm-hmm.
odds that somebody is going to be the highest bidder and the best steward of the business long
Mm-hmm.
term, odds are low. Now, anybody who you're seriously considering selling, it should be a fair deal.
Mm-hmm.
But to take the next dollar to sell it to somebody who's going to be able to pay that next dollar because they're going to really strip the business
Mm-hmm.
and do all the things that we talked about that are sort of in the traditional LBO private equity playbook, it'll have serious consequences on the people you work with, your friends, their family, the community, your customers. I mean, I would hope, especially if we're buying a business, that the person cares more about than just maximizing the
Mm-hmm.
immediate dollar. If they don't, we honestly just don't want to buy the business because it's
Mm-hmm.
going to seep into everything. The
Yeah.
whole culture of the
Mm-hmm.
business is
Yeah.
going to be transactional,
Yeah.
zero
Yeah.
sum, hard
Mm-hmm.
nosed,
Right.
short term. I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Right.
and by the way, we've looked at plenty of businesses that the family says, look, we're not interested in selling the business to just anyone, but you always have to be the highest bidder. And we're like, well, then you are really
Yeah.
interested in selling the
Yeah.
business to
Like
anyone.
you just
Yeah.
told me there's only one thing on your
Yeah.
scorecard, and that's, bigger
Well,
dollars. Yeah.
Well, and what you're talking
Correct.
about
Yeah.
is you want to find a business owner or a
Mm-hmm.
family or what have you that it's been deeply personal to them. That business has been part of their fabric of their family, their life, their community. And so, how if say you end up being the ultimate buyer of that business, how do you help them navigate that emotional journey of transitioning the company over to you all as the new the new owners of the business? I mean, because it's like sounds like that's what you want. You want to find that person who has that emotional connection to their business and want to find a good buyer that has that same culture, if you will, of that they have.
Yeah, I mean, it's just about getting to know one another and developing
Mm-hmm.
a trusted relationship. There's a lot of different ways to transition a business. Sometimes it can happen quickly. We bought a business from a 95-year-old who said, "Hey, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm not interested in rolling forward. I'm not interested in a seller note.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in deferred payments."
I wouldn't want
Like,
that either.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not interested in an employment agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my time has come and gone, and
Yeah.
I'm ready to move on, and that's perfectly fine. We worked with her to develop a plan of what was going to happen, what was her assessment of leadership, and then we transitioned it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been highly successful. There's other owners that we've been in partnership with for 10 years plus. And so there's really no right or wrong answer to how you transition. I would say the only danger is if you're not telling the truth and you change your mind. Those are two very
Mm-hmm.
dangerous positions. So we say to people, hey, look, you can tell us anything. You can say, I want to walk out on day one, or I want to be with you for 10 years. What you can't do is say, I want to be with you for 10 years. And we set everything up to do that. And then all of a sudden, day one, you're like, actually, just kidding, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be real bad. That's going to be
Mm-hmm.
bad for you. That's going to be bad for us. And we try to set up all the
Mm-hmm.
incentives around that as well.
Yeah.
So, what we say is just don't surprise us. We're not going to surprise you. Let's just be open. There's going to be frictions. Every
Mm-hmm.
relationship's going to have frictions. That's inevitable. We want to treat you with respect. We want to say sorry when we're wrong. We're not going to be perfect, but we would ask for the same level of self-reflection in return.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of
Oh,
goes
that's
back to one
great.
of your core principles is like the no assholes rule, and like so, how do you identify and protect company culture, when you're acquiring the business? What does that look like with and how you use that principle in that?
Yeah, I mean, so we do have this policy, the no
Yeah.
asshole policy, and what
Yeah.
that typically means is for most people, and I want to kind of define it for people who haven't read. It's on our website. I
Yeah.
think you'd be
Yeah.
maybe surprised reading it. It's not we're awesome. There are assholes out there, and we just distance
Mm-hmm.
ourselves from them. That's actually not what we say. We say there's only two types of people. There's either assholes or assholes in recovery, right?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what is the difference between the two of them? An asshole is somebody who's not self-reflective, who's living for themselves, who's short-term oriented, who's transactional. It's really, really hard to do a good deal or be in
Mm-hmm.
partnership with somebody who's like that. And we've met people like that. And look, hopefully those people get into recovery. And recovery looks like, man, that is an acknowledgement of who I am or who I was, and it's not who I want to be, and I want to be better. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like I said, there's only two types of people. It's either those are in recovery, and we hope that we're in recovery. We're trying, right? We
Mm-hmm.
we fail often, but we try to say sorry. We try to learn and grow. And so, how do we safeguard culture is an interesting question. We're buying these businesses all with very different cultures. And I'm a big believer that the dynamics and the culture of a business are largely driven by the personality of the owner and the founder. In fact, when you get away from that dominant personality, that's where you sort of get into this weird, squishy middle management, professional manager, bland syndrome,
Mm.
which basically no smaller company survives for very long. You can kind of see it with some momentum at larger companies, right? I mean, we'd probably sit here and talk about the bigger companies that are sort of living on the life support of their founder that was maybe even 100 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
they just got so much momentum and so much cash that they just kind of are run by, it feels like an army of like former consultant robots, right? Who are just like, do the safe thing in the safe way all the way, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a smaller company. So these companies come with a very distinctive flavor. And we want them to be fully them. Like if we're buying them, we're buying them for a reason because they're successful and that we admire at least large portions of the
Mm-hmm.
culture that they have. But those cultures may be very different. I mean, we've got a wide variety of portfolio companies in various areas of the country, very different culturally. What we're trying to do is there's some non-negotiable cultural elements that we're trying to move people towards. So we're trying to move people towards long term as opposed to short term, right? So we want everyone to be thinking about, hey, what is in the best long-term interest of my family, of the business, of our customers? If you do that, it's going to be really hard to screw things up. Right? We want to move people towards genuine kindness, not niceness. I think one of the most
Mm.
damaging things in corporate culture is this culture of niceness where everyone
Yeah.
smiles and is like
Mm.
seething underneath. It's like, how are you? Fine, fine. How are
Yeah.
you? Good, good. And then it's like, well, it turns out like they're suffering, they're going through a divorce, they're addicted to something
Mm.
or some things. They're seethingly mad at all their coworkers. All that stuff bubbles up and detonates, right? So what we try to say is, hey, just be kind. Kindness is sometimes hard. Kindness is about telling the truth. It's about being authentically who you are, about pulling down the mask, at least most of the mask. I mean, maybe not all the mask. I mean, trying to be fair and reasonable. And it's hard for people to be fully themselves when economics are involved at work, but at
Mm-hmm.
least try. That's what we're trying to move people towards. Obviously, anything that's illegal, we're not going to break the law. Anything that's unethical, we're not going to allow that. But really, short of that, we're just really trying to move people towards longer term oriented kindness as opposed to niceness, and then see what happens. And it's a slow process over time.
Jake and Sam here.
Thank you for joining us. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and especially leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes. Really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, 1 star, it's on Sam.
Yeah, it's definitely on me.
I mean, because it's like, sounds like that's what you want. You want to find that person who has that emotional connection to their business and want to find a good, buyer that has that same culture, if you will, of that they have.
Yeah, I mean, it's just about getting to know one another and developing
Mm-hmm.
a trusted relationship. There's a lot of different ways to transition a business. Sometimes it can happen quickly. We bought a business from a 95-year-old who said, "Hey, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm not interested in rolling forward. I'm not interested in a seller note. I'm not interested in deferred payments.
I wouldn't want that either.
I'm not interested in an employment agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my time has come and gone, and
Yeah.
I'm ready to move on, and that's perfectly fine. We worked with her to develop a plan of what was going to happen, what was her assessment of leadership, and then we transitioned it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been highly successful. There's other owners that we've been in partnership with for 10 years plus. And so there's really no right or wrong answer to how you transition. I would say the only danger is if you're not telling the truth and you change your mind. Those are two very
Mm-hmm.
dangerous positions. So we say to people, hey, look, you can tell us anything. You can say, I want to walk out on day one, or I want to be with you for 10 years. What you can't do is say, I want to be with you for 10 years, and we set everything up to do that. And then all of a sudden, day one, you're like, actually, just kidding, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be real bad. That's going to be
Mm-hmm.
bad for you. That's going to be bad for us. And we try to set up all the
Mm-hmm.
incentives around that as well.
Yeah.
So, what we say is just don't surprise us. We're not going to surprise you. Let's just be open. There's going to be frictions. Every
Mm-hmm.
relationship's going to have frictions. That's inevitable. We want to treat you with respect. We want to say sorry when we're wrong. We're not going to be perfect, but we would ask for the same level of self-reflection in return.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of
No,
goes
that's
back to one
great.
of your core principles is like the no assholes rule, and like so, how do you identify and protect company culture, when you're acquiring the business? What does that look like and how you use that principle in that?
Yeah, I mean, so we do have this policy, no
Yeah.
asshole policy, and what
Yeah.
that typically means is for most people, and I want to kind of define it for people who haven't read. It's on our website. I
Yeah.
think you'd be
Yeah.
maybe surprised reading it. It's not we're awesome. There are assholes out there, and we just distance
Mm-hmm.
ourselves from them. That's actually not what we say. We say there's only two types of people. There's either assholes or assholes in recovery, right?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what is the difference between the two of them? An asshole is somebody who's not self-reflective, who's living for themselves, who's short-term oriented, who's transactional. It's really, really hard to do a good deal or be in
Mm-hmm.
partnership with somebody who's like that. And we've met people like that. And look, hopefully those people get into recovery. And recovery looks like, man, that is an acknowledgement of who I am or who I was, and it's not who I want to be, and I want to be better. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like I said, there's only two types of people. It's either those or in recovery. And we hope that we're in recovery. We're trying, right? We
Mm-hmm.
we we fail often, but we try to say sorry. We try to learn and grow. And so, how do we safeguard cultures? Interesting question. We're buying these businesses all with very different cultures, and I'm a big believer that the dynamics and the culture of a business are largely driven by the personality of the owner and the founder. In fact, when you get away from that dominant personality, that's where you sort of get into this weird, squishy middle management, professional manager, bland syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
which basically no smaller company survives for very long. You can kind of see it with some momentum at larger companies, right? I mean, we could probably sit here and talk about the bigger companies that are sort of living on the life support of their founder that was maybe even 100 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
they just got so much momentum and so much cash that they just kind of are run by, it feels like an army of like former consultant robots, right? Who are just like do the safe thing in the safe way all the way, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a smaller company. So these companies come with a very distinctive flavor, and we want them to be fully them. Like if we're buying them, we're buying them for a reason because they're successful and that we admire at least large portions of the
Mm-hmm.
culture that they have. But those cultures may be very different. I mean, we've got a wide variety of portfolio companies in various areas of the country, very different culturally. What we're trying to do is there's some non-negotiable cultural elements that we're trying to move people towards. So we're trying to move people towards long term as opposed to short term, right? So we want everyone to be thinking about, hey, what is in the best long-term interest of my family, of the business, of our customers? If you do that, it's going to be really hard to screw things up. Right? We want to move people towards genuine kindness, not niceness. I think one of the most
Mm-hmm.
damaging things in corporate culture is this culture of niceness where everyone
Yeah.
smiles and is like
Mm-hmm.
seething underneath. It's like, how are you? Fine, fine. How are
Yeah.
you? Good, good. And then it's like, well, it turns out like they're suffering, they're going through a divorce, they're addicted to something
Mm.
or some things. They're seethingly mad at all their coworkers. All that stuff bubbles up and detonates, right? So what we try to say is, hey, just be kind. Kindness is sometimes hard. Kindness is about telling the truth. It's about being authentically who you are, about pulling down the mask, at least most of the mask. I mean, maybe not all the mask. I mean, trying to be fair and reasonable. And it's hard for people to be fully themselves when economics are involved at work, but at
Mm-hmm.
least try. That's what we're trying to move people towards. Obviously, anything that's illegal, we're not going to break the law. Anything that's unethical, we're not going to allow that. But really, short of that, we're just really trying to move people towards longer term oriented kindness as opposed to niceness, and then see what happens. And it's a slow process over time.
No, that's awesome. I love one of the things that you talked about earlier about trying to find, business owners, founders that aren't just thinking about, dollars on their scorecard, and they're thinking about other types of things. As you've looked at these businesses, do you find that a lot of business owners get sucked into this trap of only thinking about value in terms of what they think the scorecard is supposed to look like. Like I'm supposed to go get, more money for my business than my buddy did, or my buddy got, 10 million bucks for his business. So I should get $10 million for mine. Or do you find that people really have discovered a sense of who they are and they're, learning and they're willing to prioritize those things over just the dollars?
I mean, I think this mirrors what I would call the health of the general population. I
Hmm.
think that most people struggle to be emotionally healthy. And so most people are competitive and comparative. And I mean, we know that's the thief of joy,
Hmm.
to compare ourselves and be competitive. The reality is that you hear things at the country club, right? If I
Hmm.
mean, the people that we're buying these businesses from are already wealthy. They've done very well for themselves. They've got friends typically who are in a similar position. They're comparing
Hmm.
their life to the other people's lives. Bill from the country club came in and said, "Oh, I sold my company for a 10x multiple." And now the question is 10x what?
Yeah.
Like everyone,
Yeah.
everyone assumes that they know what the
Hmm.
X is, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, 10x what is the question? I mean, I always joke with somebody, I'll give you a 50x multiple. We can just find whatever we're multiplying it by,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very rare, and I think this is again human nature, is we're going to give
Hmm.
people incomplete information and let them kind of draw in the lines. And
Hmm.
so when Bill at the country club says I sold my business for a 10x multiple, what you don't know is that he only sold 51% and the 10x is sitting under a bunch of preferred shares that have all
Yeah.
this other structure on
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
By the way, the payments over the course of a
Right.
7 year period, dot 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 dot. So what you imagine is Bill's just walked out of there with big bags of cash and he's the richest dude now that you know. And
Hmm.
the reality is, maybe if everything works out, Bill may make a tremendous
Yeah.
amount of money. The reality is he probably made a lot less than you thought he did.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so, oftentimes we hate playing that role. So if people's expectations are misaligned, we just say, hey, no problem at all. We wish you the best. You can go out
Hmm.
there and try for that. We're
Yeah.
not going to be the ones to talk them down. We will say things like, hey, maybe what you heard is not correct. Let me show you some data from the market. Again, we want to be fair. We're not trying to pay
Hmm.
under market. Trying to find great businesses run by people that we enjoy and that we have confidence in and trust in, for a fair price. And
Hmm.
we don't want to underpay because that sets up the relationship terribly long term. Like the worst possible situation would
Hmm.
be that we dramatically underpay and the person has seller's remorse and is resentful towards us and just sets off the relationship in a
Yeah.
really bad way.
Well, because
Yeah.
most times they're going to still be living in the community more than likely, and they'll still be interacting with you in one way, shape, or form, whether it just be around or what have you. And so it's like you want to make sure it's mutually beneficial that everybody feels when they walk away that, hey, this was a good deal on both sides.
For sure.
Well, and well, kind of going back to your portfolio companies. I mean, you do have a diverse, set of companies that you all are involved with, from aerospace to fencing to amusement park manufacturer right here in Wichita. So how do you ensure long term success and resilience amongst such a diverse set of companies in your portfolio?
Yeah, so we have something called the blueprint process, which is kind of our strategic planning process that we kick off every fall, goes throughout the fall, and prepares us for the next year. Really, in that, we're trying to say, hey, what happened? Where are we now? Where are we going? One of the big components of that is keeping an updated memo of what would happen in the event of your untimely death. We're all going to die. None of us live forever. We've had this actually happen, unfortunately, in our portfolio where people have passed away very quickly, unexpectedly.
Hmm.
And it's one of the biggest dangers, right? I mean, we want to rely on the people um, that we have in place in leadership. We want to trust that they're doing a great job. And if they are doing a great job, they're going to be difficult to replace. We need to have a plan for what that looks like. So we all want to be on the same page about where we're going. We all want to be on the same page about who's going to take us there and what would happen in the event that the leadership is not able to perform.
Mm,
That process allows us to at least have a game plan for sort of break glass in case of emergency. And hopefully that never happens and we can peaceably transition over a long period of time. I mean, we have people, we say, hey, look, if you're planning on retiring, just tell us, right? Like if you say, hey, I've got 3 to 5 years left, is it 3 or is it 5? Like, let's talk about that. We probably need to have like 3 years to really make a slow, tidy transition. So just communicate. Again, don't catch us off guard. We won't catch you off guard. Let's just all try to make sure we're on the same page.
Hmm.
Um, it's worked so far. I mean, I think that's all you can ask for.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you look at some of the companies that have been a good fit for your business, and you think about what kind of put them in a position to get there, what are some of the things that they did maybe that 3 to 5 years before they were ready to have a deal with you? I mean, thinking specifically about folks that might be looking for a transition in their business and they're trying to get ready for that process and they've got some time ahead of them and they think, hey, maybe a business like yours, maybe a partner like yours might be the right fit. What are some of those things that kind of 3 to 5 year period they could be doing and thinking about to put themselves in a good position to be a good fit?
Yeah, so let's talk about maybe the base of what's needed, just
Hmm.
period, in order to transition successfully. Now,
Hmm.
no one typically has 100% of these covered all the way. There's
Hmm.
always going to be deficiencies, but the more that you can think about, if you were the buyer and you
Hmm.
didn't know what you knew, which is really hard to put yourself in the position, you don't know what you know now, you're the buyer, what would you want? Well, you'd probably want a accurate record keeping. That would probably be
Hmm.
one. So, like having good, clean financials,
Hmm.
which is, by the way, pretty rare. So most entrepreneurs are hair on fire, big picture, future oriented.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
thrive and operate in chaos. I don't know how many times I've heard, well, I don't know what our financials say, but I know what the cash is.
Yeah.
Great. I'm
Oh
glad that you've
no.
been able to operate. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like I'm buying a business
Yeah.
from Rain Man, right? Like
Yep.
I don't know how to do anything with that because I don't know the business like
Hmm.
you do. I can't just operate it on cash. Like
Hmm.
we need to have good, clean financials.
Hmm.
That would be kind of just base level number one. So if you couldn't take at any time your financials, export them to somebody else, and they could clearly understand what's going on in the
Hmm.
business, have an accurate representation of reality, you got to get that done. That's
Hmm.
just a number one. Two, there's got to be a leadership team that supports the business outside of you, especially if you're planning on taking significant steps back in the near future or after the sale. It should you should not rely on the buyer to come up with all the leadership to run the firm. It's not going to go well. You at least want to have two or three people outside of you that can talk to the customers, have diversified relationships, whatever the secret sauce of the business can do that thing, and have sort of a backup for the backup. I think that's a very necessary component of any successful transition. Um, I would say having the ability to make a decision. So, it's easy to think about a lot of these businesses as being a single owner. That's also pretty rare. Usually there's fractured ownership. So, um, do you have all of the pieces in place to be able to have one person that can make the decision to negotiate, make the decision to sell the business, has the
Hmm.
power and authority to move the deal forward? I've seen more deals die because there's, ex-wife, other partner, children even
Hmm.
into a trust that they get a harebrained idea that they want something different than what you've negotiated, and it kills the deal. Um,
Hmm.
I would say getting a list of all the kind of in that vein of all the disclosures that somebody would need to make about who else can veto the transaction. We got all the way down the field with a deal a few years back, and he called the week before closing and said, "Hey, I got bad news. Deal's off." And we are like, "I thought everything's great." He's like, "Everything is great. I didn't tell you that I had taken out this debt that's not even on the books, off balance sheet debt, and they have a veto right for me to sell the business." We're like, that was not
Yeah.
part of your disclosures. And we've already asked you that. And he's like, yeah, I know. I just didn't think it would be a problem. Killed the deal.
Man, do you
Yeah.
feel like you dodged a bullet on that one?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean,
Yeah.
but at the same
Goodness.
time,
That
I mean,
sucks to
you
be
can
that far
only,
in.
yeah, I mean, we'd spent tons of money and time, on the
Yeah.
deal. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that would be another one. Probably the last one that I would say is, don't try to time the market. So we've
Hmm.
seen this. I mean, look, again, Bill from the Country Club says, "Oh, I got a 10x and I got it on, this crazy growth trajectory and it was awesome and blah blah
Hmm.
blah." That happens from time to time. What happens more often, and we've seen this recently with a deal that we were involved in, is, everything's going great and you're like, "Oh, we should sell out now because everything's at peak."
Hmm.
Problem is the sale process really to do it right is like 18 months,
Hmm.
at least a year. but probably closer to 18 months,
Yeah.
maybe even 2 years.
Yeah.
By the time if you're at peak or you see the peak, by the time you get there,
Mm-hmm.
the business is going to be in decline. And it may be, by the way, a temporary decline or have flattened out. And so the issue is you're setting expectations to go up and to the right. And your banker, if you've hired a banker, has put all these projections in there that's like, we're going to the
Hmm.
moon.
Yeah.
And then you get under LOI with
Uh,
somebody. And look,
yeah.
are there bad buyers who just don't know how to do math and can't diligence a company? Sure. Don't count on it. Right.
Yeah.
What you should count on is somebody who's going to be thoughtful and do their research. And so somebody like that comes along, they're told, here's the story. The story is we're going to the moon. And then all of a sudden the math starts to break down. And they say, well, what's this? And what's this? And you start having to kind of fudge and hide stuff. Or you tell them the truth and say, actually, things aren't as good as we told you they were. Well, that starts to erode trust. And what else is
Mm-hmm.
not true that you told
Hmm.
us? And
Hmm.
all of a sudden, things are just kind of spiraling downwards. It's just really hard to get a deal done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say is if you don't try to time the market, if you say, hey, look, we don't want to try to make as much money as we possibly can now and then leave somebody else holding the bag. Instead, you say, look, we genuinely want to have the next group, whoever owns this thing next buyer, be successful because that's going
Mm-hmm.
to help our community. That's going to help, it burnishes your reputation. You get to take your
Hmm.
baby into the future. That's fantastic. It helps the employees that you care about. It
Hmm.
helps everyone, your customers, your suppliers. Um, there's a type and a mentality amongst sellers that I just so admire that they're like, look, we flourished for a long time with this business. We want to pass this off to somebody else who will continue
Mm-hmm.
to flourish in the future.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That is so beautiful, and it's such a healthy environment to operate in. So I would say is really getting yourself into a heart posture and a position to be able to do
Yeah.
that is far better.
Yeah, and Sam talks about this a lot in a lot of podcast conversations is that transition of value, and and it's value is just more than the dollars on in your P&L. I mean, it's the people that you work with day in and day out. It's the families that have depended on you and the company and you've seen people grow before your eyes, and that is beautiful. I mean, it's like I grew up in a family business, and unfortunately, my dad's business ended up having to close just because of the sake of the economy. It was in the car wash industry, but it's like he wanted to do what was right by his employees and make sure that everybody got their paychecks at the very last day, and they understood what was happening. And it's I wish it would have turned out differently, but now my dad is in business with my oldest brother and are doing tremendously well. But he's taken a lot of those experiences and really transition that value to my oldest brother as they're building their business. So it's like it's I see a lot of what you're talking about in my dealing with my family, and it's just really cool to hear that.
Well, and I mean, some of what you've talked about, I think, integrates with that idea of understanding value when it comes to how we run ourselves and run our businesses. And when people are operating at a level where they're constantly focusing only on business metrics, and their personal identity becomes so enmeshed with their business identity that they can't separate them, they can't take a step back and go take a vacation. They lose sight of who they are on an individual level. It just obscures so many of those different aspects of things that we at our core truly value, and we start to make decisions off of that, and eventually those deeper values that at one point we held, very, very sincerely just become so eroded that, sometimes they just get completely erased. And then you have folks that, I think one of the most frustrating things about that is it usually doesn't create the value that people expect it to, because they're so integrated, they make themselves irreplaceable that they cap their own growth potential.
Mhm.
And then I think a lot of people put themselves in a position where they only have the ability to sell to the top bidder. In some instances, from a financial perspective, like the numbers just the business won't support a value that's high enough for them to tell themselves they can care about anything else, because it's like, hey, I've got bills to pay, I've got a lifestyle to maintain, and I don't have the flexibility to take a lower number because I've got to pay for stuff. And I think that's a really sad thing, and I think it partly starts that. I think you hit on this earlier. We become reactionary. We become focused on the near term. Our time horizon becomes very shallow instead of, taking that step back, getting out of that hair on fire mode, and really thinking about what is the long-term value here that I'm optimizing for. I mean, I really like the way you approach things, and the way you're thinking about value and its impact. And I also really like not. I mean, not to be your hype man here. You don't need me to do that. But I really like what you said about the market, and not trying to time the market. I don't think I've ever met a client that's been really happy with trying to just chase the one more dollar. I don't know anybody that's ever been really satisfied with that. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes they get it, but I don't know any of them that got there and are like, man, that was everything I dreamed it would be.
Well, because
Um,
I think you're selecting for a group of people that you don't want to work with. I
mhm,
mean, if you think about it, if the only thing you want is the highest transaction, you're going to
mhm,
attract highly transactional people.
Mm-hmm.
right. Yeah,
And no one enjoys working with somebody who's doesn't care anything about anybody but themselves, who's going to be probably an egomaniac, who's going to be focused
mhm,
on, hey, well, I paid you a bunch of money. Yeah, of course I had
right,
to put a bunch of debt on the business. Yeah, of course I got to strip everything out of
right,
this thing. What do you think was going to happen?
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, but I don't want any of that. And it's like, but yeah, but we have to do that because that's how
right,
I was able to pay you more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we got to be careful about how we're selecting for a
Mhm,
group of people to
Yeah.
work with. And we think about this a lot in reverse, right? So like if somebody's only focused on the top dollar above all else, then they probably ran the rest of their organization that way. And it's probably a great selection bias for us to
Mm-hmm.
not look at that business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'd be remiss to not mention the book that you recently updated, The Messy Marketplace, and we're probably a lot of that we're talking about is in this book. So The Messy Marketplace is, as I remember reading it, it's more from the seller's perspective. It's somebody who's preparing to sell their business, and so since you wrote the new updated version, what are the biggest new challenges and opportunities in today's market, from when you wrote that book?
Yeah, I would say probably if I was a seller, if I wouldn't come from this world, probably the most confusing new thing would be just the different types of buyers with different types of incentives.
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
So, it first came out with the book in 2018, I think it was. Since then, there's really been an explosion of interest in buying a small business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneurship through
mhm,
acquisition.
Yep.
And it seems like at every country club across the country, there's a group of dudes who get together and talk about buying businesses and do deals. And
mhm,
some of them are very sophisticated and some of them aren't. And some people have money and some people don't, and some people can get deals done and some people can't. It's really hard on the surface, right? If you and I decide to create private equity firm, what's the nearest river to where you guys are? You know,
Uh,
the Arkansas River.
Arkansas,
yeah,
if
well,
you're if
yeah,
you're
yeah,
Arkansas River,
we'll
yeah, yeah.
yeah. We'll be the Arkansas
Yeah,
Capital Partners or whatever.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah,
you
mhm,
just say a name, we throw up a website. It takes us 10
Mm-hmm.
minutes on Squarespace, right? We talk about
mhm,
operational improvement and how we, care about businesses and all this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
You just can't tell. And so one of the things that I really recommend any seller does when they come in contact with a potential buyer, say, hey, sounds great. Um, I'd like to do my homework, just like I hope you do your homework on me. Who can I talk to that you've done deals with?
Mm-hmm.
Who can I talk to that have been your lawyers, your accountants? Like, how long have you worked with them? Where does the capital come from? Like, how much capital do you have? Like, is this a stretch for you? Is this not? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
just talk openly about it, and
mhm,
let's not try to play hide the ball.
right,
Um, you'll be surprised if somebody gets anxious or frustrated based on you asking remedial questions of who they are.
mhm,
Probably a good warning sign.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Because what's going to happen when you get into the really hard questions, or if you can't trust their responses on those?
I mean, I don't know how many people
Yeah,
we've seen. I mean, we see a bunch of deals from people who say, "Hey, we got offered, some high multiple by somebody who made all these promises, and they could never close the business because they didn't
Yeah.
have the money." And then what
Mm-hmm.
they're doing, we actually get these pitches all the time from people who say, "Hey, I just signed up this business at an 8 times multiple.
mhm,
Would love to partner with you on the capital side." And it's like, well, what are you doing? You just go around and sign up deals and then come to capital. Like we don't do that, but
Mm-hmm.
apparently some people do. But there's no
yeah,
cost to them,
yeah,
right? If I come to you and I say, "Hey, I'm this incredible private equity guy. Want to get this deal done. Here's the offer I'm going to make you." You guys are, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible."
right,
And then I'm turning around and I'm having to go sell a bunch of people on deals and cut deals on the back end. Well, then who actually owns the business? Who actually
right,
represents the decision making?
right,
It's not clear. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes like this really awkward, uncomfortable bait and switch that happens
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, well, wait a minute, I thought you were the guy. Well, you're not the guy. You just stand in front of these people over here. Well, who are those people? I don't know them. Well, now those are the owners of your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Be
I
careful
mean,
with who you
in,
get into
Mhm.
bed with.
yeah. I mean, in some instances, it's more like you're selling to a broker. Like you're selling to somebody
Correct.
who's really just going to turn around and sell the business to somebody else. They just haven't told you about it. And
Yeah.
when you're, as a seller, when you're banking on that
Yeah.
relationship that you've developed, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And
Well,
I mean, I like that. I like that you make that point because I mean, a lot of folks who are selling a business, that's the only time they're going to sell a business. I mean, that is it, right? They may have never done it before, or if they have, it's been on a completely different scale, a completely different setting, or maybe they bought one a long time ago, but they're not used to this kind of an experience. And that's why they need to educate themselves. They need to get a good team. But I think you've hit on something I think is one of the biggest problems in the marketplace right now is that you've got a bunch of people undervaluing the start of the process. And they go in and they're just looking at, hey, what's the LOI that on paper looks the best? Where's that biggest number? Where's that biggest upside? And they're not thinking about the success of the deal. They haven't defined for themselves, hey, what is value for me? What am I really trying to optimize for? And they're not developing the relationship that's going to get them through the process or the trust that is. And like we've talked to folks that have looked at selling to firms that have like I can't remember 20%, 25% close rate on their signed LOIs. I'm like, so you want to hire me? You want to spend money on me to go have a 25% chance of close with somebody that clearly doesn't value this as much as you do? And I mean, it's just mind blowing. I mean, I don't know if you feel like that's the same level of problem as I do, or maybe that's just my own personal bias, but
Yeah,
um,
I mean, I've seen stats that the average in the lower middle market is 25% close.
yeah,
Average.
goodness.
well,
I mean, I think that one, I can say from a buyer's perspective, we have the capital. There's no other
Mm-hmm.
decision makers. There's no checkoff rights.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're fully
Right.
yeah.
funded.
Yeah.
We
Right.
every LOI we go under, we intend to close and close
Mhm.
promptly.
Mm-hmm.
And our close rate's probably only 70%,
Yeah.
maybe 65%, which
Mhm.
sounds like, ooh, well, what happened to all those other ones?
Right.
Well, we did an LOI recently that I mean, we were super excited about the deal. The business went off a cliff during diligence. And we
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
guys, like this business isn't what you told us it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, were they lying to us? No, I don't think so. I think the business just took
Yeah.
a turn. Now, is it short
Yeah.
term? Is it medium term? Long term? We don't
Right.
know, but it's
Yeah.
hard, right?
Right.
We had
Right.
another
Yeah.
we had another LOI that we were under last year that um, uh, the owner said some very obvious things that were not true. And when
Mm.
we got in there, we were like, "You said this. This is reality." And he kind of just went, you know,
Eh, yeah.
eh.
Well,
Oh,
and it's like,
oh no.
and I think when in your book, I
Yeah.
mean, a large part of your book is dedicated to due diligence because I
Right.
mean, I think so much critical things can happen in that process, and that's part of the
Mm-hmm.
process you don't want to rush. I mean, LOI is just a step, and then that's maybe like halftime, and then due
Mm-hmm.
diligence is the second half of really trying to dive deep into the business and uncovering things that were maybe not on the disclosure that should have been, so on and so forth. So
Sure.
yeah, it's well, kind of on success stories of some of your portfolio companies. One, since we're in Wichita, we have Chance Rides here in town. And for those that don't know who Chance Rides is, if you're driving down Kellogg by 235, they have a big building that looks like you could have fit a Ferris wheel in it because they build those. But they've made that acquisition a few years ago, and that's a legacy company. Been around Wichita for a very long time. Kind of talk through what that process, how it came about, and how you're going to maintain the legacy of that business in Wichita, because it's just a very cool success story for our community.
Yeah, Chance Rise is such a cool business. I mean,
Hmm.
I joke that I finally living my childhood dreams of being the roller coaster tycoon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when we first
Yeah.
heard about it, and I was like, man, it's an odd thing to name a amusement park ride Chance. Like, do you want
Yeah.
to not Chance to do what?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, the last name of the family is
Yeah.
Chance. Like, it's an interesting timing on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got involved with the Chance family, admire them and what they built over a long period of time. It's I don't think anybody wakes up and is like, you know what I could do today is I could either do what I was doing or I could start a amusement park ride
Hmm.
manufacturer. So there's not a lot of new entrants into the space, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty legacy business. Trust
Mm-hmm.
matters a lot. The business has
Yep.
been around for a long time. Um, and yeah, we're excited about continuing the legacy. So we want to expand more internationally. We're doing a lot of efforts towards that, modernizing a lot of the plant operations, procedures, technology in the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And it came at a really good place. I mean, they're highest quality products. I would say they're the worldwide leaders in carousels, and they're the
Yeah.
worldwide leaders in small trains.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of the two areas that they are unmistakably known as being the worldwide leaders. They also
Yeah.
do a lot of transportation around theme parks, so building tram systems and things like that
Yeah. Yeah.
that help. And then, yeah, roller coasters, kind of like the big flashy, the big, eyes, like the London Eye, like the big wheels are
Mm-hmm.
something they do. It's just it's a really cool business.
Yeah.
What I would say is, like any business, it can be challenging. The economy with tariffs now that we were talking about. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things that come into play. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, some of those are tailwinds for us. Some of those are headwinds. I mean, this is part of
Mm-hmm.
the challenge of in the last 5 years. I talked to a guy recently who gosh, he's been operating a business for 40, probably over 40 years now. And I said, how's the last 5 years been compared to the last, 15, 20 or whatever? And he said, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh. He's like, by far the hardest operating environment of my career has been the last 5 years. He was like, I've seen more stuff come from all angles than I'd ever seen before. I'm like, oh, this feels pretty hairy to me too, but I'm glad to know it. This
Yeah.
is pretty difficult, and I
Yeah.
think that chance is no different than the norm. I mean, they're buffeted by a lot of different winds and waves from all over, and a lot of different, and some of those are tailwinds, and we're just excited to be along for the ride with them, pun intended,
Yeah.
and to help the family continue to flourish in what they're doing, and help the team there, and continue to serve
Mm-hmm.
our customers. So.
Well, and kind of talking on the gentleman you talked about who's been in the business for 40 years, and knowing that, hey, we're not in this alone. So you have Main Street Summit that you hold in Columbia, and I've not had the opportunity to go to, but I've heard great things about it. I mean, I think it's what you've done a very good job with your organization, you and your team, is building a network. Whether you're in business with them or not, you've really built this network for people to all be together, and you aren't shy about giving out information. So I subscribe to the succession plan that's going on right now on LinkedIn and everything too. And because my dad's kind of thinking about that with his business right now. And it's just, I just commend you on, not holding on to your stuff. Like you guys are very public about everything you post on your website, even if you're wanting to approach you for, trying to acquire our business or something like that. But just kind of talk on why, you think building a network is so vital to your organization.
Yeah, well, okay, so maybe we could just take a step back from first
Yeah.
principles. Like, we're only here for a short period of time. Like Ecclesiastes calls us a mist. So if you
Mhm.
think that you're this like big important, like we need to have all these secrets, and we figured out something that everything that has been will be again. Like there's no
Mhm.
new things in this world. Things change, technology evolves, but at the end of the day, it's all been done before. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to live open-handed with everything, with the
Mhm.
money that we've been given to steward, with the companies we've been given to steward, with the reputation we've been given to steward, and with the knowledge that we've been given to steward. Like when I first came into doing this, I came into it by accident. I accidentally bought a business. There was nothing online about how to do this. There was no one really talking about it. There's a little bit out of Harvard, a little bit out of Stanford in their search programs. But again, this is like 2009, 2010. Very little out there. I said, this is insane. Like, I had to go to tons of people in the region across the country that I had to get networked into to ask them like very basic stuff. And,
Mhm.
there's deal guys that have been doing deals for a long time. It was kind of like the secret cabal, right? It was like an apprentice program you had to go through. And I learned because I hit my face on the pavement over and over again. And I
Mhm.
was like, there is a lot of people out there that I would love to just be able to help. Does it help us because occasionally, somebody's like, oh, I've heard of you all and we get a deal or something? Sure. But at the end of the day, it's just a way better way to live.
Mhm.
If we can be a positive impact, we can give away, live open handed with what we have, it's going to help everyone. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of how we
Mhm.
do that. I'm grateful to people who lived open handed with me, and just want to continue to pass it on.
Yeah. Love that.
Dude,
Love
that's
that.
awesome, man. Yeah. Well, Brent, do you have any last recommendations or thoughts for folks that are listening that are trying to build a business that really matters in their community?
Yeah, I would say maybe the one thing is to have have proper expectations of how difficult and messy it's going to be. I think it's
Mm.
easy to read things online. There's some influencers now that are really popular that are like, oh, just buy this thing, laundromat, gas station, whatever the thing. They
Right.
kind of all pick a different asset, and it's like, and you'll live in rainbows and butterflies and all this stuff, and everything's going to go great. You're going to get
I've
rich, and
not
it's
seen the
easy,
rainbows yet.
right? Yeah, it's not like that. That's not the reality, right?
Mhm.
If somebody's selling you a course, let me tell you that they can't do it themselves.
Mm.
Sorry,
Mhm.
that's the reality. Um, I would say it's hard. It's hard because it's people. People are messy. When you get multiple people together, the messiness compounds, and you just need to be aware of it. It's going to be, if you decide to go down the path of entrepreneurship through acquisition, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. It's going to be hard in different ways than you can foresee. It's going to require
Mhm.
grit. I guarantee you, there's going to be times where you wake up sweaty in the middle of the night, chest
Mhm.
pounding, wondering what's going to happen.
Hmm.
That's all normal and part of the process. And I would just say, you should really be thoughtful about what you're willing to tolerate and what the impact is going to have on you and your family, and
Yeah.
just make sure you're
Mhm.
in a position to do it.
Hmm.
Um, I would
Yeah.
say there are resources out there. There's a lot of things to read, tons of stuff on the Permanent Equity website. In fact, if you're interested in buying a business, I actually wrote a piece called "How to Buy Your First Smaller Company" on our website, because I get this question all the time. It runs you through a litany of questions you should ask yourself: how you think about
Hmm.
capital, location, um, style of the business, sector you should be in, all these things. There's a lot of questions that hopefully should prompt you to think about it. And then I would say is get into community. So why did I start Main Street Summit? We'll hopefully have around 2,000 people here in Columbia, Missouri, November 4th to the 6th. We built it because it's the community we want. We
Hmm.
get a lot of value out of the community. We have questions all the time we can't answer. In fact, I was texting with somebody right before we came on about AI and the impact in small business, and they're out in Silicon Valley, and they're actually doing it in the venture space and doing kind of
Hmm.
small business work. We're all trying to help each other, right? I have a different perspective than he does, and you all have a different perspective than me. We want to bring people together. And so Main Street's a great way to come together for 3 days to learn and grow and have fun together and form meaningful relationships. It's like it's a festival. It's like a film festival, except for there's no films. You have discussions and
Yeah.
hear talks on different topics. Yeah, we just encourage anybody who's listening to this to go to mainstreetsummit.com and sign up. Come join us.
No, that's awesome. Well, Brent, thank you so much for being generous with your time and your experience and your wisdom. We're really passionate about helping people build the businesses that create thriving local communities and having better, more successful transitions with their businesses. And your contributions here are significant. We really appreciate that. So thank you for taking the time to join us.
Yeah. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, guys. It was fantastic. Really appreciate you guys. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Hey,
Thank
you too.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.